Baruchot habaot, and welcome to our weekly edition of Torah classes. And if you're logging on to ohelsarah.com or to Torah Anytime, or if you're a YouTube subscriber and you follow us every week, thank you so much for tuning in. And we're so proud of you. I'm so proud of you that you diligently and so efficiently and devotingly log on every single week, and you listen to the shiurim, and you make your comments, and you send your feedbacks, and you ask your questions. Kadosh Baruch Hu should grace you with tremendous strengths to be able to continue to learn and to be fortified through his Torah. Tomorrow night, we are going to be celebrating the Hilulah, the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, alav shalom, one of the greatest Talmudic sages of all time. But before we begin the shiur, I would like to give a shout out and thank some of the donors who donated in the last 2 weeks, and also to dedicate the shiur first and foremost to 2 huge tzaddikim. One, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, alav shalom, and his son, Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon. They both spent quite a number of years in the cave together learning the secrets of Torah. And to Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, alav shalom, whose yahrzeit was just now this past Thursday night and Friday. 2 huge tzaddikim. They were actually co-students of Rabbi Akiva. So these are giants that we're talking about. I also want to dedicate this shiur for the refuah shlema of Yaakov Yishai ben Naami, to the refuah shlema of Nachama bat Yocheved Chanash, refuah shlema bimhera. Also to the Ilui Neshama. We just had a yahrzeit now of a good friend of mine's mother, the Ilui Neshama of Galina bat Yafim, Sarah Ofer's mother. And also the yahrzeit of Tamara Babajanov's son, alav shalom, Simantov HaKohen ben Tamara. I should have an Ilui Neshama together with Galina bat Yafim, aleh shalom. Also, for Shidduch, to the following 3, Sarah Fagel bat Yerachel, Yaakov Natan ben Batya Rachel, Tzvia Aviva bat Yerachel. We hope that very soon we're going to hear good news that they're going to go down to the chuppah. Also, this shiur is in memory of Annalise and Werner Volmar, Yeshav Ilui Neshama, the tremendous aliyot and shamayim in the heavens. Also to the refuah shlema of Shana Star. I'm sorry I didn't write Batu, we'll just say Shana. And for a successful aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Tammy Bauscher, who donates all the time, thank you so much. She wants this, she will dedicate it to Hashem's rachamim on her family and of all the people that need God's mercy. We also want to dedicate the shiur to Yehudit Bat Sarah aleh shalom, Francis Waldman, and all the neighbors of Ruth Jagdeo donated some money, Leilui Nishmata. So we want to honor her by also dedicating the shiur to her. And Miri Goldberg, thank you so much, who donated for the Hatzlacha, Bracha, and Parnasa of all Am Yisrael in the month of Iyar. We thank the donors. And by the way, it's still not too late. If anybody ever wants to sponsor a shiur, they can. You could just log on to www.ohelsarah.com. Sarah is without an H. OHELSARA.com. Click on the donate button, and then in the memo section, just write that you would like to have the lecture dedicated for, let's say, the speedy recovery of an individual, or for shidduch, which means possible betrothal and marriage thereafter, for Ilui Neshama, for the elevation of somebody's soul that passed away recently, or maybe it's the anniversary of someone who passed away recently. So could always do that on ohelsara.com. And of course, your donations, they don't just help maintain our organization with just the daily activities or just the upkeep, but also there are many times that people need help, and we use that money in order to help them. For example, this past Shabbat, I was privy to the fact that there's someone in our community who needs furniture. They don't have furniture. So, Mezat Hashem, whoever donates this time, we're going to help get them some furniture. So, we have a lot to do and so much to learn. As I said, tomorrow night we're going to be celebrating the mini holiday of Lag BaOmer, which occurs 33 days following the first day of Pesach. And it's the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. On this 33rd day, there's a tremendous amount of simcha, an enormous happiness that's expressed with bonfires, singing and dancing. Maybe if I get a chance to around here, I'm going to film some of it and then post it on the next shiur, Be'ezrat Hashem. And we wonder, what is Lag BaOmer doing smack in the middle of this sad period of Sfirah, where we mourn the loss of 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's students who all died during the 32-day period between Pesach and Lag BaOmer? We need to understand this because there are historic lessons of great severity and teachings that could apply in this generation. So let's begin by taking a moment to learn about the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuot that are known as the days of Sfirat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer. Now, originally, Sfirat HaOmer was the celebration of the harvest season that was observed in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, during the time when the Bet HaMikdash stood in Yerushalayim. Initially, this 50-day period of Sfirat HaOmer should have been a time of great joy for many reasons. You see, the period of the Omer coincides with the days on the calendar where the Jews left Mitzrayim, when they left Egypt on Pesach. So in essence, every Jew is literally counting the days from the first night of Pesach when we departed from bondage until Matan Torah, until the day that we received the Torah at Har Sinai, which took place on Shavuot. So in a way, we could say that the exodus from Egypt was the physical birth of a nation, of Am Yisrael, because our bodies left Mitzrayim, our bodies left Egypt. While Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, completed the process through the spiritual birth of the nation of Am Yisrael, because we accepted the Torah HaKdosha, the Holy Torah. Now, on the night of the Seder, we read the following words in the Haggadah of Pesach. We say, Bechol dor vador, in every generation, Chayav Adam lirot et atzmo, a person must see himself, ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim, as if he himself left Egypt. What does that mean? Chachamim explain that each of us should know that Am Yisrael's reality is built on the foundations of the exodus from Egypt, and everything that happened is happening in the world and will happen with the nation of Israel stems from the exodus of Egypt, from Yetziat Mitzrayim. By the way, that's something we spoke about on numerous occasions, that the Galut of Mitzrayim, the exile of Egypt, and the redemption from Egypt is the prototype for all exiles and future redemptions. Now, the generation that merited to be freed from Egypt was the generation that merited to witness a great and divine revolution against Egypt by Hashem that led to their redemption. And then that same generation were witness to a great revelation at Har Sinai because they adhered to the commands of Hashem as he was taking them out of the Galut and into a new world of Geula, of redemption. Therefore, each generation should see itself not only as continuing the spiritual chain of the previous generations, but also as if that generation itself came out of Egypt, which means that we have to see ourselves as a generation of renewal, a generation of rising, that we too could be zoicha to great miracles as our ancestors were, if we obey and adhere to Hashem's Torah. So we have to see ourselves as the generation that came out of Egypt. Then we have to prepare ourselves during the Sfirah period to once again accept the Torah on Shavuot in order to make our freedom spiritually complete. And what that means is that the days of Sfirah really should have been days of joy, days where we commemorate a spiritual elevation and the birth of a holy nation. But instead, we observe these days as a mourning period. There are no weddings during the counting of the Omer. We don't listen to live music. We don't cut our hair or purchase new clothing during this entire period. Of course, there's the halakha that says, for some of us, Lag BaOmer is the ending point. So some can listen to music and do everything after Lag BaOmer. Some actually hold until Shavuot, but we disengage from any activity that lends itself to a state of happiness. And as we're experiencing the sad side of Sfirah, suddenly we're hit with the Chag of Lag BaOmer. It's the one day during this sad period when the morning comes to a 24-hour halt. And during those 24 hours, we're not permitted to be sad because it's supposed to be a very happy day. Why is it that we experience a sense of sadness during what should have been a happy time of the Omer? And why is the sadness paused for one day with the celebration of Lag BaOmer? Now, the Talmud Bavli in Yevamot tells us something that we're all familiar with. Chachamim teach us that during this period of the Omer, from day 1 through the 32nd day, Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 students who lived during the time when Rome occupied Eretz Yisrael, that was about 1800 years ago, they all died, sadly, from a mysterious plague called Askera. Actually, Askera, the way the Gemara and the Midrashim describe it, sounds very much like corona. It was a plague that affected the lungs. People had a very hard time breathing, very much like the symptoms of corona. Hashem dispatched this plague into the Jewish quarter and it killed these 24,000 Talmidim. Why did they die? The Gemara teaches us that they did not afford honor one to the other. Mipnei shelo nahagu kavod ze bazeh. Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, was the day that the plague came to a close and Rabbi Akiva's students stopped dying. Now, the words of the Gemara urge us to analyze this episode in detail, and it also prompts us to ask more questions and to answer them if possible. So, first of all, why did this episode of the death of Rabbi Akiva's students, as tragic as it was, merit 32 days of mourning when greater tragedies in Jewish history befell Am Yisrael, and we only commemorate that sad period with one day? Think about the destruction of both the first and second Beit HaMikdash. That was a massive blow to Am Yisrael, and millions of people died. Yet we only commemorate it with one day, which is Tisha B'Av, and a 9-day mourning period that is very intense. What about the tragedy of the Chet HaEged, the sin of the golden calf? How tragic was that? especially since the sin occurred at the heels of Yetziat Mitzrayim and all the miracles that Hashem did on our behalf, and yet we sinned. I mean, some of these tragedies are only commemorated by a single day of mourning. And if we're already talking about casualties, what about the massacres of the Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, the Khmelnytsky pogroms, and the Holocaust that took millions of Jewish lives? Don't these events kind of eclipse the death of Rabbi Akiva's students? But these tragic events that I just mentioned, the pogroms, the torture, the burning at the stakes, crematoriums, etc., are not officially commemorated by even one designated day of mourning. The Rabbanim did not institute a designated day of fasting to mourn for all that loss. So why is the death of Rabbi Akiva's students given much more weight where we mourn for many days? Every event in the Jewish calendar was placed there by Hashem because of the significance of the seasons and of history. That means that the nature and events that happen in our history correspond to and will interlock with certain days and periods that are most suited either for celebration or for mourning. That's something, by the way, that Shlomo HaMelech Alav Shalom wrote in Sefer Kohelet. He said, Lakol zman va'et. Everything has an appointed season. Lechol chefetz tachat hashamayim. There is a time for every matter under the heavens. Et livkot ve'et lischok. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. Et sefod ve'et rikud. There's a time to eulogize and there's a time to dance. We have moments in life that involve every aspect of emotions. So there's a time for joy and celebration, and there's a time to be sad, introspective, and to mourn. The question is, why does the Sfirah mourning coincide with the happy Chagim of Pesach and Shavuot, which in turn coincide with the period of the harvest celebration with Sfirat HaOmer? Not only that, but we need to discuss the story of Rabbi Akiva's students, because what were they really guilty of that they deserved to die such a gruesome death? And if they died because Hashem punished them for their sins, why should we mourn for them? If God penalized them, perhaps they deserve the punishment. We have to find out. And then we need to answer the question of why Lag BaOmer is a day of celebration. After all, Lag BaOmer was a pause in the dying of Rabbi Akiva's students. So wouldn't it have been more suitable to set aside just one day to mourn the loss of all those 24,000 who died? And then there's one more question we need to address. Chachamim tell us that there's another reason these students died. They died because of their involvement in the rebellion that Bar Kochba waged against the Roman Empire, which we're going to talk about soon. So what's the connection between Lag BaOmer and the uprising against the Romans by Bar Kochba and his army? And how does that connect to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar Kadosh, who lived during that same period and whose life and death we celebrate on Lag BaOmer? So as you could see, we have a lot of work to do. I really hope that I'm able to answer all these questions today. If not, we're going to have to leave it to the next Lag BaOmer, which I know you might not be happy about. Patience. Hopefully by next Lag BaOmer, we won't have to mourn anymore because Mashiach will be here. Be'ezrat Hashem. The answer to these questions lies hidden in the history of a very stormy era, in the mystery of the Jewish concept of the Messianic era. So let's talk about the Bar Kochba rebellion, and then we'll move on from there. Now, the first thing we need to know is that a lot of the Talmudic material that deals with political issues was written with a great sensitivity to the Roman censorship and their restrictions. Many pages of the Gemara, of the Talmud, are written in hidden form or codes because the Rabbanim were not able to openly write about the political atmosphere at the time for fear of their life. So in order to acquire an accurate picture of what really happened during that volatile time, we have to kind of piece the story together by using various historical sources, coupled with the clues, and carefully selected words that the Gemara offers us. So the story is as follows, and it's something that Rav Yosef Chaim Shuam Shalita actually discusses in one of his shiurim. There's a Gemara of Yevamot that discusses the death of Rabbi Akiva's 24,000 Talmidim who died during the period between Pesach and Shavuot. As we said, it was a 32-day period to be exact. And that's shocking. So many deaths in such a short amount of time. Think about it. 750 of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim were dying every day. And yet we kind of see from the Gemara that he doesn't seem to say one word, nor does he actively respond. There were no hespedim, no eulogies that he gave concerning these students, no musar, no rebuke that he offered. He did not close the yeshiva down in memory of the students who died. Instead, he traveled to the south of Eretz Yisrael to seek out 5 new Talmidim, 5 new students, in order to begin from new and to start a new yeshiva. Wow, what's going on over here? I mean, is it possible that this is really what took place? Could Rabbi Akiva have been that passive concerning the death of 24,000 students in a 32-day period? Is it possible for students to have died because they did not afford honor one to the other? I mean, since when is the punishment for disrespectful behavior death? I could understand if the students were severely punished by other means. Perhaps they should have been ousted from the yeshiva, penalized, or spiritually demoted. But death? That's very extreme. And to complicate matters even more, the Gemara says that there are witnesses who came forward to prove that the students of Rabbi Akiva really died. Instead, the Gemara says, Amru, which means they say that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim died. They say? What do you mean they say? As if to say, oh, it's a rumor that they all died. Amru, some people say that they died. What? Well, wait. You mean to tell me that I'm mourning for 32 days, 1,800 years later, for something that may or may not have been? Could you imagine the Gemara making such a statement? What is this all about? 750 Talmidim are dying per day. And Amru, I mean, it's said to have been a rumor, and Rabbi Akiva stays quiet. We need to analyze this episode, because when we hear things like this, we don't just move on so quickly. We have to stop and we have to consider the matter. What happened over here? What's going on? So let me give you some background information first. As we all know, the second Bet HaMikdash was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 CE of the Gregorian calendar. All of Yerushalayim and the surrounding countryside lay in ruins. Thousands upon thousands of Jews died in the brutal battle against the Romans as they tried to protect Yerushalayim. Thousands were taken into captivity and sold as slaves. Thousands of them were persecuted. Many of them died of starvation during this battle because of the Roman siege. And thousands were forced into exile. This was indeed a dark time for Am Yisrael. When the Romans were victorious, and they were victorious because HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed them to be, their victory made them think that the Jewish nation was now permanently defeated and pretty much done with, finished. In order to celebrate their victory over the Jews, Titus, the Roman general, erected a huge victory monument in Rome that stands to this day. It's the famous Arch of Titus, and on it the following words were inscribed: Judea capita. Judea is kaput, finished and done for. Chaz v'shalom. But even though Bnei Israel were defeated, the spiritual leaders of Am Yisrael struggled to rebuild Jewish life and establish the Jewish institutions. They were so successful that around 135 CE, a Jewish military leader named Kochba succeeded in organizing an army to rid Eretz Yisrael of the Romans, who were still governing at that time. Thousands railed to Kochba's side in order to wage a rebellion against the Romans, including the great Talmid Chacham of the generation, the holy Tana, Rabbi Akiva, alav shalom. You see, at that time, it was easy to gather an army to rebel against the Roman Empire because the pagan foundations of Rome were slowly beginning to crumble. A multitude of Romans were in search of a religious alternative, and many of them subsequently found Christianity to fill their void. Many were attracted to Judaism and they converted. Among them were members of the Roman Senate, if you could believe that. Wow, it's incredible. So there were tens of thousands of people who wanted to get on board with Bar Kochba's rebellion against Rome. So the consensus was, and Rabbi Akiva agreed, that if the vast number of Jews who lived throughout the Roman Empire could be inspired to join a coordinated rebellion together with the Gentiles who wanted Rome gone, perhaps the Romans would finally be crushed. But many of the Rabbanim disagreed with Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kochba. They felt that starting a new rebellion and getting into another battle against the Romans was doomed to fail, and they urged both Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kochba to avoid any further bloodshed because too many Jews had already lost their lives. Now, Rabbi Akiva held that Bar Koziva, who he named Bar Kochba, that was his original name, Bar Koziva. Bar Kochba means the son of stars. Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kochba was the Mashiach, and he didn't want to see how Bar Kochba adopted fraudulent behavior and did the most outlandish things against Torah. All the Rabbanim told Rabbi Akiva, Akiva ben Yosef, you're making a huge mistake. Even though Bar Kochba appears to be a great scholar who knows all the halachot, all the laws, even though he knows the secrets of Kabbalah, and we can't seem to outwardly detect any wrongdoing on his part, but our collective Jewish spirit, well, we all feel that something here is not right with this man. We all get a sense that underneath all those external layers of holiness and spirituality, within Bar Kochba, there lies a rasha, an evildoer. And we urge you to please be careful and not take his side concerning anything. Rabbi Akiva disagreed with them. And he said, I'm very sorry, but I believe that you're the ones who are mistaken. If the rebellion against the Romans is successful, and Jews from all over the world are united in a mission to return to Eretz Yisrael and rebuild their homeland, I believe that they could bring about the Messianic era. Rabbi Akiva believed that the great era in which all Jews return to Eretz Yisrael even before Mashiach is revealed, hint, hint, would be a demonstration to Hashem that they're ready to be redeemed. And that's going to inspire God to rebuild the Bet HaMikdash. That will finally usher in a new world where Am Yisrael would lead the other nations into an era of justice, of spiritual renewal and fulfillment. It would create an era of peace and righteousness where the entire world would have knowledge of Hashem, just as the Navi Yeshaya prophesied. Ki mala haaretz de'ah et Hashem. For the land shall be full of knowledge of God. Kemaim leyam mechasim. Just as the water covers the sea. Rabbi Akiva felt that the fact that Jews were able to unite around a single leader made this event distinctly different from the one of the previous century. Because in the previous century, when the Romans attacked Yerushalayim in order to destroy the city and also the Bet HaMikdash, there were so many divided factions among Bnei Israel who actually fought with each other inside the walls of Yerushalayim, even as the Romans were storming the gates. You imagine? So Rabbi Akiva felt that if everybody seems to be uniting around the Bar Kochba, this is certainly a sign that the Messianic era can come to life in their generation. Now, interestingly, many historians believe that it was actually on Lag BaOmer that Bar Kochba's army managed to reconquer parts of Yerushalayim, which created some semblance of Jewish independence, peace, and hope that was restored, but only for a short time. Anyway, going back to our story over here, the Chachamim could not understand how Rabbi Akiva could be right about Bar Kochba while everybody else is wrong. He's right and everyone is wrong. So what happened? Rabbi Akiva decided to test the matter himself. He approached Bar Kochba and he asked, he said, Bar Kochba, why is it that there are Gentiles in your Jewish army? Don't you know that a Jewish army must consist of righteous men who observe the Torah laws and are worthy to be in the army of Hashem? Well, what are these Gentiles doing in our army? And Bar Kochba said, well, we need as many people as possible in order to defeat the Romans. If we're going to tell these people to go, our army is going to decline to but 24,000 soldiers, while the Roman legion has tens of thousands of soldiers. So Rabbi Akiva says, don't you have faith in God that although we may be few in number, he can create great miracles for us in that battle? Don't you know that when it comes to the holy Jewish army, numbers don't mean anything? Now, some Chachamim state that as Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kochba were discussing this matter, a snake came along and bit Bar Kochba and he died. That's one opinion. Others say that he died in battle. But right before he died, Rabbi Akiva told him, I was wrong to name you Bar Kochba. You're not the son of the stars. You're not the one who's going to fulfill the prophecy of Kochav Yaakov, of the star of Jacob who represents the Mashiach. You can't possibly be the Mashiach. You're truly your namesake. You are Ben Koziva. You're the son of deception. You're a Kozev. You're a fraudster. You represent falsehood. You're truly a Bar Koziva, not a Bar Kochba. Now, what some of us don't know is that the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva were once soldiers in Bar Kochba's army. Oh, that's very significant, because perhaps now we could understand why they died. It wasn't only because they didn't afford the proper respect to one another. It was much deeper than that. Not only that, but there's a reason why Rabbi Akiva did not come to the full awareness of who Bar Kochba really was. Rav Yosef Chaim Schwab explains that there are times that when someone in Yahadut may come along who possesses a great deal of Torah knowledge, someone who on the outside appears to be a great tzaddik, someone who knows the entire Talmud backwards and forwards, who has a vast knowledge of all Torah-related matters, he knows Kabbalah and the entire Torah by heart. Somebody who seems like a devout Jew because he knows how to, we'll say, cover his tracks very well. But the real Rabbanim out there will sense that there's something about that person that just doesn't feel genuine or right. Interestingly, the majority of the Rabbanim during the Roman era sensed that Bar Kochba was not the real deal. The one who had a hard time with it is Rabbi Akiva. He was not able to sense the entire truth concerning Bar Kochba. Rabbi Akiva missed something. You know why? Because at the end of the day, it had very little to do with how much Torah knowledge Bar Kochba possessed. It had nothing to do with this man's great abilities. The difference between the other Rabbanim and Rabbi Akiva is that all the Rabbanim had something called Zchut Avot. They possessed the merit of their forefathers. But Rabbi Akiva did not have Zchut Avot because he was a descendant of Gerim, of converts. He wasn't only Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. He was also known as Rabbi Akiva ben Gerim. Sadly, he did not have Zchut Avot. And as lofty as he was, as great a Talmudic genius as he was not able to sense what the other rabbis naturally and instinctively felt in their core. It took him a while, but finally Rabbi Akiva realized that they were right and that he was mistaken. Therefore, these Talmidim, these students who were originally Bar Kochba's followers and soldiers, they heard the words of the Chachamim saying, nobody should obey Bar Kochba because he is not the real Mashiach. And they followed Bar Kochba nonetheless. So in a way, they were allowing themselves to be led by, and they were working for the benefit of a failed Mashiach. And they did so against the advice of the majority of Chachamim. And we know the majority rules. Therefore, Rav Yosef Chaim Schwab explains that this might just be the reason why they deserved a severe punishment. And for that reason, Rabbi Akiva remained passive when they died. That's why he didn't eulogize them. He finally realized the reason for their death. They died because they sinned a great sin of following a false Mashiach and for disobeying the words of the Chachamim. Luckily, HaKadosh Baruch Hu spared the life of Rabbi Akiva due to his genuine remorse and tshuva, although he too may have been deserving of a punishment, because Chachamim tell us that he was so involved with Bar Kochba, he believed him so much that Rabbi Akiva, the great rabbi of the generation, became his assistant. He used to carry Bar Kochba's towels to the bathhouse for him. He became his servant. Could you believe that? But the point is that because Rabbi Akiva lacked Zchut Avot, it didn't afford him the ability to sense the truth about Bar Kochba. And perhaps that too is the reason why Hashem saved him. Perhaps Rabbi Akiva wasn't directly responsible for not having seen the truth concerning Bar Kochba, because it wasn't his fault that he was a Ben Gerim, that he was the son of converts. Therefore, God didn't hold him completely accountable for his mistake of believing that Bar Kochba was the Mashiach. But his 24,000 students, the 24,000 soldiers in Bar Kochba's army, they didn't have a reasonable justification for their failure because they all descended from Jewish parents. They most certainly did have Zchut Avot. So they should have obeyed the Gedolei Israel. They should have heeded the advice of the leaders of the generation who urged everyone not to follow Bar Kochba into a rebellion against Rome. And because they didn't listen and forged on ahead with Bar Kochba, they were held accountable for following the leadership of a failed Mashiach. Oh. So when the Gemara states that Amru, people say that they died. It doesn't mean that there's a question as to how many of the students died or if they died. No, it means that it's not so certain what the true cause of death was. Amru, I mean, some say that it was because of the fact that they didn't offer kavod to one another, but some say that it was because of their involvement with Bar Kochba's rebellion, that they joined a man who was deemed a false Mashiach by the Chachamim. Wow. What an incredible chidush by Rav Yosef Chaim Schwab. Now, before we move on, some of you may be curious to know what caused Bar Kochba's spiritual decline and his messianic failure. How did a man who Rabbi Akiva thought was so great fail? Chachamim inform us that there were 2 Roman legions in Eretz Israel when Bar Kochba's uprising began. One was situated in Yerushalayim, and one was near Megiddo. Both were decimated by Bar Kochba's soldiers. As a result, the Romans sent reinforcements that were situated in Jordan, Syria, and Egypt. But those soldiers were also beaten. Almost every legion the Romans sent was ambushed and decimated by Bar Kochba's army. In desperation, the Roman Emperor Hadrianus summoned his best commander, Julius Severus, to take over the battle. Julius had to actually import soldiers from the lands of Britain, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, and Bulgaria. But those legions as well struggled in battle against Bar Kochba's army. Nevertheless, in the middle of Bar Kochba's attempt to rebuild the Bet HaMikdash, things changed. He suddenly lost the support of Rabbi Akiva as well as the support of any of the Talmidei Chachamim who agreed to once back him. What happened? What made them abandon ship, these rabbis? Bar Kochba murdered the holy tzaddik, the great scholar and Tana, Rabbi Elazar HaModai, alav shalom. Some claim that Rabbi Elazar was actually Bar Kochba's uncle, if you could believe it. Why did Bar Kochba kill him? Bar Kochba accused Rabbi Elazar of collaborating with the enemy and revealing to them the secret entrances of the fortress city of Betar, where many Jews were hiding over there. Now, that was an untruth. Rabbi Elazar never collaborated with anyone. That was just a rumor that was started by, and it was the deceitful work of the Jewish Christians who wanted to undermine Bar Kochba. Who were these Jewish Christians? Well, they were the Jews who believed in Christianity, and they had an interest in Bar Kochba's demise and failure. Why? Because his success as the Mashiach would put to rest their belief that Yeshua was the Mashiach, right? So they had to come up with a way in order to destroy Bar Kochba. So they betrayed Bar Kochba in order to get the results that they wanted. They hoped that he would kill Rabbi Elazar, which would in turn cause him to lose support of all the rabbis. And that's exactly what happened. When Bar Kochba executed the holy Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Akiva realized that Bar Kochba no longer possessed the qualities that initially led him to believe that he was the Mashiach. Now, whether the spiritual failure of Rabbi Akiva's students was the cause for the failed Messianic era, or whether it was the failure of Bar Kochba to rise to the spiritual heights that's expected of the Mashiach, is not something that we know for certain. But what we do know is that suddenly the great plague of Askera came down and struck the Jewish encampment, and the dream of the Messianic era of that generation came to an end. For reasons that have remained hidden from us, the students of Rabbi Akiva were not considered by Hashem to have reached the great spiritual heights necessary to bring about the Messianic era in their time. As great as they were, there was something very important missing from the picture. The Gemara tells us that Rabbi Akiva's students did not show proper respect one to the other. Now, precisely what these words refer to, we're not really sure. Chachamim have tried to offer some answers, but the truth actually lies with Hashem. What they do all agree on, the Chachamim, is that with greatness comes a great deal of responsibility, as well as a magnification of reward and punishment. Because they failed, because they were lacking in a designated area of characteristic traits, which when compared to our generation would certainly be counted as a minor sin. But because of their great stature and spiritual levels, HaKadosh Baruch Hu judged them in a more exact manner, and therefore their mission to help bring the Mashiach was removed from them, and instead they died a mysterious death. And with them died the messianic hope of that generation. And more. Much more tragedy came upon the Jewish people after that. Many Jews died in battle, in addition to those who died of hunger and disease. And in the end, the massive Jewish army failed and was overturned by the Romans. Whoever survived the rebellion against Rome was dispersed in the Galut. That created an intense trauma for the Jewish people that affected them very deeply. Many Jews lost hope, and the nation remained very passive, afraid to attempt the regaining of power and glory. In this great and tragic defeat of Bar Kochba, not only were 500,000 Jews killed, but the Romans were determined once and for all to uproot the Jewish religion and the Jewish people, and to bring an end to their hopes and dreams. It's because of this that we mourn today. The mourning period of the Sfirah isn't only because the students of Rabbi Akiva died. We mourn the failure of Bnei Yisrael to bring about the Messianic era. We mourn the fall of Jewish hope and the motivation for a Messianic age. We mourn for every anti-Semitic occurrence for which Jews suffered since that day. Every pogrom, every massacre, every crusade, the Holocaust, the expulsion that took the toll of so many millions of Jews throughout the 2,000-year-long and bitter Galut. All this wandering and persecution that's traced directly to the disappointment of Bar Kochba and the failure of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim. This was a tragedy of tremendous proportions because so many Jewish lives suffered under the bitter exile of Rome, and Rome didn't fall at that time. Instead, its fury and rage led to the exile and division of the Jewish people. Yet, on that very Lag BaOmer, that very day, the 33rd day of the Omer, 2,000 years ago, a new and hidden light of hope emerged from the darkness. In the midst of defeat, the great Talmudic scholar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, revealed to a handful of his students the secrets of the Zohar HaKadosh. Embedded in the Zohar HaKadosh are the secrets that will bring about the coming of Mashiach. Rabbi Shimon's words have kept that hope alive for us till this very day. And interestingly, on Lag BaOmer is when the plague stopped. That means that the messianic dream may have been delayed, but it was never destroyed. That dream has been encouraged throughout the generations, and that's what enlivens us today. And what we see from all this is that our history brings together many important events. And more than this, we see interesting parallels between our generation today and the era of Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kochba. after experiencing a terrible Holocaust in which many people believed would spell the end of the Jewish people, lo alenu, we experienced a restoration of the nation. Although Hitler, Yamach Shemo v'zicho, destroyed many of the great European Torah centers, we witnessed the rebuilding of yeshivot in America and across the entire world, including, and most importantly, in Eretz Yisrael. We experienced a great revival of Torah study. The Tshuva movement brought about a huge return to Torah for so many who strayed from the path. While other countries are unstable and corruption is rampant, Bnei Israel is being given the opportunity to rise above herself and to help create a redemption. The question is, will we succeed, or will our efforts be halted because of our own failures, our own inability to respect the differences within the Torah community instead of uniting for a common cause, the cause called Geula? The story of Rabbi Akiva teaches us many lessons. It also offers us an opportunity. Remember that it was Rabbi Akiva who understood that the words in the Torah of V'ahavta l're'acha kamocha, love your fellow man as yourself, is the important principle which we have to internalize if we want to create change and bring about the Geula. Let's not forget that Rabbi Akiva himself was the protocol Baal Teshuvah. He was a man who at the age of 40 didn't even know how to read the Aleph Bet. He didn't know how to read the Hebrew language. And yet it was Rabbi Akiva who rose to the challenge and became one of the greatest Torah scholars in Jewish history. There are hundreds of thousands of Jews from various backgrounds and nationalities that possess the potential of Rabbi Akiva. Our redemption is in the hands of this generation. Will we attempt to achieve the Geula, or will we withdraw into our own selfish cocoons by refusing to bear the responsibilities that HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed before us? My dear friends, it's not enough to wait for the Mashiach and claim we need him. We have to actively do something to perfect our Torah lives. We cannot sit back and be passive in the Galut. We have to learn from Rabbi Akiva's students and understand that the coming of Mashiach and everything that's going to transpire when he's revealed depends on us. May we be zeicha soon to that time. Amen. Ken.